All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials Are Old podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? There's many great millennial actors out there, like Vincent Price and Boris Karloff and
Marlon Brando.
Marlon Brando, exactly. But there's another great millennial actor that we don't really talk about and who's really cool and epic. He's Canadian, actually, maybe the most based nationality out.
Celine Dion.
No, I was going to go with English Canadian and I was going to go with Ryan Reynolds, a person we both love. Would you agree with that, Brian? A cool guy.
He's cool. He's really based. So sometimes he gives interviews where he says like, hey man, love is love. Like, I don't, he says like, hey, I think weed is okay, man. It's not that big a deal. So like pretty cool guy, handsome, and just a fine actor.
Exactly. And also Mint Mobile, that was the most above board sponsorship ever.
Yeah, I'm talking to you right now over a Mint Mobile phone. Does Mint Mobile still exist?
Oh, yes, it very much does, but he sold it to T-Mobile for like $100 million.
That's probably a good choice on his. Yeah, no, we love Ryan Reynolds. We always talk about how, the 2000s were not a great time for culture, especially mainstream culture. And, not a lot of, in my opinion, good iconic film stars. We have talked about that. But I gotta say, one exception, a guy that is not bland, is not frustrating, doesn't kind of make my skin crawl. Sexiest man alive, Ryan Reynolds in the mid 2000s.
No, absolutely. So without further ado, we're going to talk about Ryan Reynolds in this episode. How
Ryan
much we
Reynolds.
absolutely love him. We love him so fucking
funny,
much.
based, cool.
Absolutely. But before we get into our subject this week, Brian, let's bring back our segment, Cringe Generational Cringe Millennial Moment of the Week. Woo! Yeah! All right. And Brian, real quick. So you didn't tell me exactly who this cringe millennial is. You just gave me a very brief window into what this might be. So I'm very interested.
This is a little bit more of an esoteric thing. So this is someone I became aware of in 2018 to 2019. They were active on LiveJournal. And the thing about being on LiveJournal in the 2010s is that it was so dead that it was pretty easy to become like one of the most popular like posters on there, right? And there is this woman on there who just kind of posted about her old millennial life. She was about 40 years old in 2019, which is the last time I saw a post by her. I actually tried finding her account. I can't find it anymore, and I'm not particularly interested because she's just some lady that I found out about. I'm not particularly interested in like putting whatever info is still out there of her on blast, but she was one of the most popular posters on LiveJournal in the very late 2010s. And just a real quick rundown, she was in a sham marriage with a husband who she did not speak to, did not have sex with, did not really spend any time with. They had, I think, 2 children, maybe 3 children, which is why they stayed together, right? They had these kids. She had gotten pregnant immediately after high school. At the time of writing, she's about 40 years old. They slept in the same bed, but again, they did not speak to each other. They did not really have any sort of relationship. It's unclear to me why they stayed together or how that was easier than having a divorce.
You're describing a based marriage right now. What is the problem?
I'm describing a traditional American marriage. I don't know why more millennials aren't getting married because of all this great opportunities you have. The thing that really makes her stick out to me is that so her and her husband's bedroom was divided into halves, kind of sitcom style. So she had her half of the room, her side of the bed that faced her wall, right? And on that wall, she had pictures cut out from magazines and maybe a poster, I don't recall exactly, several pictures pasted to the wall of one Ryan Reynolds. This is her shared room with her husband, who she has a sexless life with. It's unclear. I don't know if she looked at the pictures when she masturbated. I don't know if maybe she just looked at them for comfort in her sad, broken life. But to make it more realistic, right? To make it really feel like Ryan Reynolds was there in her bedroom with her, she would take Axe body spray and just spray it around the wall, around the pictures.
What the fuck? Are you serious? This is awesome.
Yeah. I'm serious. And she would just be like, Ryan is here with me.
To be clear, I'm not saying that Ryan Reynolds is above using Axe body spray, but what are the chances that he uses Axe body spray?
No, it's
come
cheap.
The fuck on.
He doesn't use Axe body spray. But this woman is an old millennial. That's probably the only body spray that this woman knows, to be honest. It's what probably like men that she's been around have been using since she was in high school, and it's probably just all she knows, right? But she's like, this is what a hot guy wears. And again, I couldn't find this account when I look now. If anyone listening, or Taylor, if you want to look at some point and see if you can find these posts. It was one of the most popular accounts, one of the most popular blogs on LiveJournal for a time. It was one of the ones that would get shown in, like, you know, when you sign into LiveJournal, it shows you the most popular, most read posts, and hers would regularly be up there just because she was pretty active. Most of it was just kind of banal, kind of sad stuff about her loveless marriage and taking care of her kids, but she would regularly just talk about how, like, oh, I can't wait to be home and, you know, in my bedroom with Ryan, and, you know, she sprayed Axe body spray around her. And this is a room that she is sharing with her husband, right? Doesn't seem like he ever spoke about it. So one other thing I should make clear, they were openly and actively sleeping with other people. She would meet men, it was like, not to say this is bad, but men who, as I recall, were older, like significantly older than her, that she would meet on dating apps and hook up with. Again, very unclear to me as to why exactly her and her husband stayed together. Couldn't have been better for her kids than if they'd separated.
You know, Brian, speaking of elderly millennials, though, I think they listened to the Blink-182 song "Stay Together for the Kids" and watch the music video. And they're like, we gotta do that.
Yeah, this is the greatest song. It's the greatest Blink-182 song. It's the most meaningful song. And if there's one lesson to take away from this, it's that I need to do exactly what this Blink song tells me.
At least they didn't take the lyrics of that one song where they just fuck everything in the world seriously. They took that one song seriously from Blink.
Or like Voyeur or something. So, and the reason this is interesting to me, obviously this is an extreme case of like an old millennial woman with a sad crush on Ryan Reynolds, but it ties together so much things. So there's this like arrested adolescence to it, right? There's this fixation with Axe body spray and just kind of like the malaise of getting older, which is not unique to millennials as we get older. You know, I think that's just part of entering middle age, right? But I think it's hitting millennials a little bit differently because we basically were treated and raised and kind of like treated ourselves like children. I say this having just a couple weeks ago turned 34. It's kind of this thing where you're like, I think you hear this a lot from millennials, kind of like you skip over the adulthood side, right? The like the 20s and 30s like adulthood side. I think that's how a lot of people feel. And in this woman's case, she like kind of had a thrust upon her because she got pregnant at a very young age, right? That's the thing she carries on. It's like Ryan Reynolds. That's like her image of like the good life, the better life that she could have had. And to me, that's just so insane because I don't mean to spoil the episode, Taylor, but I fucking hate Ryan Reynolds. I've hated him since I was in middle school. I hate him more every time I see him.
No, I 100% agree. So I think it leads perfectly into our subject, which is how much we hate Ryan Reynolds. Because at the very beginning of the episode, we were not being sincere. Ryan Reynolds could eat our cocks. We don't like him at all.
Yeah, and I want to say one of the things is that whenever you say, like, hey, I don't like his acting, I kind of just think he's annoying. By the way, before anyone says this, before they say it's like, oh, you're, like, jealous because he's, like, a pretty boy. I like, handsome men. Like, that's not a problem for, you know what I mean? I like seeing, the same way it's just nice to, you know, sometimes you like seeing good-looking people in movies. I don't typically have a problem with this. My problem with him is, like, the way he talks is awful. His hair is awful. And it's also that people will always say, he actually seems pretty cool. And it's like, what? Because in 2017, he said gay people shouldn't be lynched or something?
Yeah, no, he's somebody who is, to be fair, he's technically not a millennial. He is born in 1976, I believe, so he's almost 50 years old. But he's very millennial coded.
Yeah, and this is not just, it's about Ryan Reynolds in general, but I specifically kind of want to focus on 3 of his mid-2000s roles and how that relates to kind of the position he's in now, like post-MCU.
Yes, and real quick, though, too, talk about how we're going to get into some of his, you know, the 3 2000s movies that really launched him into stardom. What did you first remember seeing him in? I'm curious, because I have one.
Waiting.
Okay, I remember him in Van Wilder. That's what I remember him in.
Yeah, most people our age, their first exposure to him was Van Wilder. I think all 3 of these films were big, basic cable movie screening shows. That's why every, like, millennial of a certain age knows these 3 movies, because they were on cable all the fucking time.
And you want to know something even funnier, Brian, about Van Wilder? Because you said that's going to be one of the movies we're going to talk about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's Van Wilder, Waiting, and Just Friends.
Another cringe element of Van Wilder, Brian, is the story of Van Wilder is legitimately based, and this is no joke, on Bert Kreischer. Yeah. Like, that's real.
Isn't that insane? That
and
sounds
talk about a cringe person. Bert Kreischer is insanely cringe.
He's one of the only people who becomes more cringe when he says, there's a movie based on my life, and then he tells you what movie it is. Not to get into it this episode, because it's not really relevant at this point. Another cringe thing about Van Wilder is just that it's a later National Lampoon production, because I gotta say it, eventually we'll have to do some sort of discussion about about National Lampoon, because that was at one point one of the most like storied and like critically acclaimed and well-regarded satirical magazines in the world, and it ended up doing Van Wilder, and it's done much worse since.
Yeah, it went from being like genuinely subversive and like very influential and made some of the best like Rome movies of the 80s and even some of them in like the early to like late 90s to just being complete straight to DVD slop and bad straight to DVD slop.
It's trash. So Van Wilder, for a lot of people our age, they would say that that's like a classic National Lampoon movie, classic college comedy. For me, that's National Lampoon entering comfortably into slop era, but not quite being so broke that it's direct to video. The thing with all three of these movies is that they're very millennial coded, and they're all listeners of the show know Taylor and I don't disregard a movie just because it's offensive or because it hasn't aged well. That's kind of the opposite of what I think this show is about. You know, it's even things that are offensive or whatever. These three movies, and this is not necessarily Ryan Reynolds' fault. He's just an actor. He didn't write the movies. Just the culture of the 2000s. They're all kind of heinous.
Yes, no, I 100% agree. Real quick, the story of Van Wilder, it's basically the story of like an ultimate like fail guy who thinks he's cool. He's like the super senior of college, basically, and his foibles on trying to get laid and succeed. That's basically what it's about. In a way that's not really interesting. It's just very trite and very cringe millennial. That's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, that's all the plot there is to Van Wilder, is he's a rich boy who keeps failing college because he's lazy and doesn't want to have a life. He just wants to stay in college and party and screw around and get wasted, right? But the movie Van Wilder doesn't present this, it doesn't really present it as, well, this guy's a fucking rich loser. You know, other people are here trying to learn and he's just like this weird, gross degenerate. The presentation of the movie is that Van Wilder is kind of awesome for this. Like, it's so cool that he's able to do this, right? To just abuse the system and just get away with it because of his rich family.
No, absolutely. And you know what? It's even more interesting, obviously. I mean, of course, this episode's about Ryan Reynolds, but real quick about Bert Kreischer is the fact that, like, he's that guy in real life. Like, he thinks that everybody thinks he's cool because he's, like, a loud, drunk lout, but he sucks and everybody thinks he's annoying. Like, nobody likes him. Everybody talks shit behind his back and everyone thinks he's a fat, lame dipshit.
Yeah, when you find out that the film Van Wilder is based on his education, it makes perfect sense. So, the thing with Ryan Reynolds and who he embodied... Well, first, we'll get into, I guess, who he embodied in the 2000s and how that led to him growing into who he embodies now in the culture, right? What I remember is in 6th and 7th grade, all of the dumb, newly pubescent boys loving Ryan Reynolds' characters, loving Van Wilder, and loving his character in Waiting, and just trying to talk like that all the time. That should tell you everything you need to know, that a bunch of kind of white trash, kind of 12 and 13, 14-year-old kids in, like, rural Wisconsin didn't know what a cool guy was, didn't know anything about sex or life or anything, and we're just kind of dumb little shits. They wanted to be like Ryan Reynolds in this movie and just be mean and have lots of sex and discard women and drink a lot.
Yes, and real quick too, the story of Waiting, basically the story of like an Applebee's or TGIF restaurant and basically the failed people that work there and the very much death of the American dream for a lot of like cringe elder millennials who thought this would be just a way to like just work through college but just never had ambitions to do anything better, and just how lame and depressing it is. And I can tell you what, even though I think all three of these movies we're going to like just briefly talk about in regards to Ryan Reynolds are bad, I would say this is probably the one that's, in my opinion, objectively the best, because it's the one that I think is actually the most realistic, because like I've heard from a lot of people that have worked these style like restaurants that this is like pretty much like a documentary for those type of people.
Heinous sex, extreme drug use. Yeah, that's true. But I think Waiting is probably just the best movie. So Waiting it's also an annoying fucking movie. That's the only one of these three movies I actually rewatched in preparation for this show, and boy, it has not aged well. It's really trying, I think, for Kevin Smith vibes, and it's just not that clever. Taylor, the way that you describe Waiting, you know, the whole death of the American dream for elder millennials who mean for this to be a stepping stone before continuing their lives, and then they're just stuck there. Well, it is about that. Saying that makes it sound better than it is, because that's almost treated, I think, as an afterthought. Like, yeah, there is a character who wants to move on from this and feels trapped in his job, but also most of the characters just kind of party and they get to fuck the hot girls that work in the restaurant and everything. You know what I mean? And ultimately, the takeaway is that the moral of Waiting, right, is, yeah, these guys are all kind of gross. It's all kind of depraved and they treat everybody like shit. But like at the end of the movie, Ryan Reynolds, he doesn't fuck a minor. So he's grown a lot as a character. This is literally the thing, is that Ryan Reynolds spends the whole film trying to fuck a 16 or 17-year-old girl. And then at the last scene, they're about to have sex and he goes, let's wait another month before you turn 18 because I don't want to take advantage of you. And then the soft music plays and you're like, wow, he's really grown. Although it's already implied pretty heavily in that movie that he fucks teenagers all the time.
You know what's interesting, Brian? I just realized as you were talking about this, I realized this movie is like the even dumber hot couch guy version of like Dazed and Confused or like a Richard Linklater movie.
So the Linklater, that is a really good comparison. I hadn't thought of that. The Linklater connection I hadn't thought of, but this is extremely a hot couch guy movie. I think of all the friends I had and acquaintances I had who had this on DVD and it was playing all the time. And it's one of those things, it's not that funny, but also the characters are not likable. Even our self-insert character, who is Justin Long, who is kind of our protagonist, who he's trapped in his shitty job and he wants more, he's still kind of a piece of shit. I've had service jobs. I've worked in the kitchen at like a shitty chain restaurant, but like, I don't know, every character in this movie is just kind of mean and nasty. There's a character who's our audience surrogate who's mostly silent, and the joke is like, he's just watching how fucked up the kitchen is, and he's like, I can't believe this. His final big moment is he gets to have a line about kids with Down syndrome.
Well, his whole thing is he does the classic like base lib thing where he just tells it as it is, and that's going to change everything. And then the fake out is that he does like the prank that everybody else does and like shows their nutsack. That's the
exactly. Yeah, that's like a core crux of Waiting, is that it involves, the wait staff showing their dick and balls off to each other and then berating whoever they trick into looking at their dick and balls for being gay. I'm just realizing if you haven't seen this movie, you might think that what I'm describing is like a commentary on dumb, homophobic, like weird sexual insecurity. It's not. Well, because as I was saying this out loud, I was like, wow, if this was like a satirical movie or like a John Waters movie, this would seem really clever.
No, it's that 2000s like homophobic like gayness that really is weird.
Yeah.
Like, did you ever have that in high school when like you go in the gym locker room and guys were always slapping each other's asses and like staring at each other's dicks? But it was like, oh, you have a fucking dick, homo. And it's like, no, you have a fucking dick, you faggot. Like, I remember that very vividly. I'm like, you're the one looking at my dick and slapping my ass, faggot. Like, what are you doing? I'm not doing any of that shit. And listen, I want to get fucked by guys and I don't even do that, you weirdo. Like, what the fuck?
Well, yeah, because you don't have some weird hang up about it where you have to make it into a joke. Waiting there's all these weird elements to it. It's also, and I have no problem with this necessarily. It has its share of nudity, although, there isn't really there's no like frontal male nudity, which is kind of bullshit considering what the premise of the movie is, considering that cock and balls play such an important role in the film. There is, and for a studio comedy, this, I guess, is impressive. There is a frontal shot of a vagina that is just nasty looking. It has a bit of cheese in it, just to give you an idea of the level of humor we're working with here.
No, it's very gross out. It's very lame. And what's interesting too is obviously we talk about this as like a hot couch guy classic, well, quote unquote, it's classic. But like what's weird is that this movie had a pretty low budget. It only had a $3 million budget, but it's basically got like a ensemble cast in it too, which is interesting. Of course, you got Ryan Reynolds, you got Andy Milonakis, David Koechner, who's a fantastic character actor. I love David Koechner a lot.
Koechner's
great.
You have
Luis Guzman, who, we just talked about I Love the 80s and I Love the Series. He was one of the talking heads in the I Love the Series. And
the cast is pretty stacked.
Of course, the classic, the elder millennial, and I mean this genuinely, maybe the biggest elder millennial celebrity of our generation. I'm not even joking. Dane Cook. He is so elder millennial.
Oh yeah, Dane Cook. Yeah. No, this was an early breakout role for Dane Cook. This is a stacked cast.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. A bad movie, although I would argue objectively the best out of the three movies we're really going to go in depth for. But yeah, definitely a bad movie. A movie that, interestingly enough, though, like, on Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts, that's basically what I watch, like, short form content on. I get, like, a waiting, like, short or reel, like, almost every day. It's crazy. Like, people are still into this movie, which is wild.
Well, I have a couple of thoughts about that. So, first of all, it doesn't surprise me that this does well on short form content. Because, like we said, this this is an older millennial classic. Like, how many times were you hanging out with a group of like guys in like high school or middle school and someone just put this on? Because for me,
it happened all the time.
Constantly.
Or it was always playing on Comedy Central. Van Wilder was playing on
Yeah.
Comedy Central. This movie was playing on Comedy Central. And like How High? That's like the trilogy of movies that were always playing on Comedy Central.
And so the other thing with short form content is that this film is full of epic clapbacks. It's full of pithy one-liners and, you know, gross out stunts. You know, there's like a setup and then a punchline if something gross happens. Things that would work very well as just a quick, short little video. Yeah.
You know what's interesting on top of that too is, of course, Ryan Reynolds would become a like Marvel character or Marvel actor. But this is like the pre-Marvel like making lines in movies just to go viral. But this was like 20 years before that was a thing. It's crazy.
This absolutely, that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about with this episode is like when Deadpool came out, Ryan Reynolds kind of was given this critical reappraisal. It's like, oh, he's really shown some dimension, improved himself as an actor. He's playing the same type of annoying guy.
Oh, 100%. And, you know, to be fair, Deadpool, obviously, I'm not going to lie, I did enjoy the first two Deadpool movies. Yeah. I did not see Deadpool versus Wolverine. I probably never will, to be honest with you. But I remember watching the first two and I'm like, this is fun, sort of referential, epic.
Well, that's like any Marvel movie, like most Marvel movies, they're going to be competently made. They're going to be well cast. They're huge productions. They're generally pretty enjoyable.
To be fair, though, real quick, Deadpool 2 did kill somebody. So there's that dark stain on that fucking movie, if you remember that.
I don't know anything about those movies, about Marvel movies, really. So
there was a scene where they were like, I think they were either driving a car down a building or somebody fell down a building and it wasn't secured and that person just fucking died.
Oh, that's very cool. Very cool.
Not great.
A lot of fucking money. My last little thought about Waiting, Taylor, is, as you said, this is objectively the best of the three movies we're going to talk about here today. Part of the reason for that, so first of all, I want to say, this movie looks terrible. Having rewatched it recently, you know, I always complain about how in the 2000s and into the 2010s, films really didn't have any color. This film, the lighting and the color and just the aesthetic choices in it kind of make it look like a dreary drama.
Well, what's interesting about that too, though, is like, say what you want about Applebee's and fucking TGI Fridays, but their whole thing was like flair and like bright colors. So it's weird. Although, to be fair, that could have been a stylistic choice because this is like a dour fucking environment where people are miserable all the fucking time.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I think is that I do think it's a stylistic choice to make it look kind of seamy and dour and look like it sucks. Because the conceit of this movie is that this restaurant and this job sucks, which, you know, fair enough. But it's not the way that I want a goofy, gross out comedy to look, personally. The other thing is that part of the reason that this is the best of those three movies is because it has some worldview. The writer-director of it is like a guy that came up from like indie film, and you can see the influence, big Kevin Smith influence, even some influence from Tarantino with kind of the snappy dialogue. And he's writing about his experience as, I believe he was a line cook at a restaurant like this. So he is kind of drawing from something. He's talking about this shitty job and all the fucked up stuff that goes on at shitty jobs like this. So there is a little bit of like an indie, I hate saying there's an indie sensibility to fucking Waiting because it sucks so bad. But you know, there's a little bit of like an auteur factor to it, which maybe makes it not more valuable, but it at least makes it maybe a little more interesting to watch than, say, Van Wilder, which, to be honest, I watched pretty much all the memorable clips and bits from Van Wilder in preparation of this, but there isn't that much to say. It's like a weird, gross, adolescent not power fantasy, but just like party fantasy, you know?
No, absolutely. And then, obviously, like I said, we're going to talk about Just Friends. Now, Just Friends is going to be a precursor to what we're going to talk about in a future episode with incels, because this is the first time I really found out what incels were, basically. Although, to be fair, the term hadn't really been popularized at this point, obviously. The term had existed, but it wasn't popularized by this point. It was the nice guy. The nice guy, that was the thing. And, you know, when I was like 13 or 14, I thought I was a nice guy, but I was just annoying and gross and like stupid. But I thought I was a really nice guy. And nowadays I look back at that and think, wow, that's embarrassing and cringe. But there are guys who are our age who look at this and like, yeah, why can't you just like me? I'm a fucking nice guy, you know?
There are fucking guys that are like 40 years old that still feel this way. Now, the thing with Just Friends is that obviously the concept in media or in popular culture of being friend zoned, or even just the general concept of liking someone who just wants to be your friend, and obviously that by itself, there's nothing wrong with being sad about that on paper, right? But this is the first movie I can think of that's like about that like crystallizes that. And this came out in 2005, which I don't know if we talk enough about exactly how casually sexist the 2000s were, because I feel like that feels almost like a dream now. It feels so long ago.
It really does. I mean, the 2000s were really the last decade, in my opinion, of just like content involving women that was almost all like really, really reactionary. Like if there was a hot woman in a movie, she was always either a dumb bitch or a sex object or somebody to be like just fucking humiliated by some weird creepy guy in a movie.
Yeah.
It's wild. Like that was like the whole thing about the 2000s. I genuinely can't think of almost any like based or even liberal feminist movies to come out in the 2000s. It's kind of crazy to think about that at any kind of mainstream appeal.
It's not even that it was the last decade that was like that. I would say that representations of women and of gay people, especially in the first half of the 2000s, I would say they were largely worse in the 2000s than they were in the 80s or 90s in a lot of ways.
I can completely agree with that, especially the 90s. Like the 90s actually had a lot of like based feminist and like pro-gay media, whereas the 2000s, it was definitely not a whole lot of that. Like the 2000s were the decade of like pretty much only poorly aged gay humor. And to be fair, obviously, I'm not going to get into all of our details of our sexuality, but both Brian and I are not 100% straight, as very few people are. But like at the same time, like we can take a good gay joke. We can take a good LGBTQ joke. These are not that in these fucking movies. They're all terrible.
Well, and it's also when we're talking about something like these Ryan Reynolds movies, the joke it's not even shock humor. It's not gross out humor. It's definitely not like satire. It's particularly in regards to like women. When you look at something like Van Wilder, it's about like putting women in their place. And I don't always say that about shitty jokes. Sometimes I think a shitty joke is just a shitty joke. Sometimes it's just being edgy. Sometimes a shitty joke is kind of funny. But sometimes when you watch something like Van Wilder, or I would say That 70s Show, if you watch an old episode of That 70s Show today, a lot of the jokes revolve around putting women in their place. Like that's what all of the humor is derived from.
Which, to be fair, Brian, I think you and I can both agree that was the only gross thing involving women on That 70s Show, right? The only gross thing that was related to That 70s Show and women. Nothing that seeped into real life at all.
There were no real life incidents that reflected the weird gender politics of That 70s Show.
You know what the craziest thing is, Brian, is the fact that that show took place in the 70s in the Milwaukee suburbs was the least gross thing about it, which is crazy.
Always disappointed me as a kid that they didn't do more with the Wisconsin setting. Like they would name drop some stuff. I guess that was cute, but as someone from Wisconsin, I just felt like they could have done more with it.
Oh, of course. I mean, to be fair, that was just the setting because that's where Happy Days took place. But no, I totally fucking agree with the whole like putting women down thing and putting them in their place and disrespecting them in a way. And once again, there is plenty of humor that is revolved around gender and racial and whatever identity. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But rewatching a lot of this, it's just so fucking gross. It's so gross and unpleasant. And we're not saying like, oh, you're problematic or like you might want to like look at your like privilege.
It's not like that. It's literally that they're gross. I don't mean like that's actually really gross. I mean that when you watch these movies and not even when you think about it, but when you look at it, you're just like, this is weird. The sexuality stuff of waiting, the fact that like it's all these guys trick each other into looking at each other's dick and balls, and then whoever they make look at their dicks, they call slurs and they slap their ass or whatever, or they paddle them, or the whole thing with Just Friends is that that's like the sensitive movie, right? Just Friends is, of these three movies, it's supposed to be the thoughtful one. It's the rom-com. It's the movie that you could watch with your girlfriend. And the whole idea, right, and again, I did not rewatch this in preparation for this episode, but I saw it a lot growing up, is that Ryan Reynolds, in high school, he's a big fat kid. Big fatty who listens to gay boy band music, and he's best friends with a hot chick, and he's in love with her. And her boyfriend bullies him. Her boyfriend is like a jock. And then he grows up to be a really hot, successful guy. You already know as the audience, you're going, maybe she should have hooked up with that fatty, because now he's Ryan Reynolds.
It's that meme, right? Where it's like, there's like this black kid, and
chick.
there's like, beat a chick. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what the fucking is. That is exactly what this is. Like, oh, you didn't like me when I was a fat loser who had no personality and sucked and was kind of creepy. Well, now I'm all those things, but I got hotter. Like me.
Well,
and it's like, no.
The movie really tries to have its cake and eat it too, because it actually turns out.
Well, Ryan Reynolds had his cake and ate it too when he was a fat kid in the earlier scenes.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, that's the only fat joke I'm going to do, I promise. As a former fat kid, that's the only fat joke I'm going to drop here.
You're allowed to do it. It's okay. You've earned it. The thing with Just Friends is that Ryan Reynolds is the nice guy. He's genuinely a nice guy who she probably should have dated because he was so nice, and look how handsome he is now. But she has another guy that she friends zoned in high school who he's a creep. And he also has grown into being a very handsome and successful musician. I think he's like a rock musician or a folk musician now or something, right? And he openly says, I'm gonna fuck her and then dump her to get back at her for putting me in the friend zone. And Ryan Reynolds is like, which is the correct response, I guess, if anyone says that. But the problem with a film like Just Friends, even if it's just a movie, and obviously you can tell a story about friends who have unrequited feelings between them without it being inherently weird or having some sexist implication. But for the guys like that, the guys that internalize that message, this movie is specifically about the idea that, like, she didn't appreciate me for the real me, and she couldn't see my inner beauty, and she'd be so much happier with me than anyone else. Movies like this, for those guys, and that's why this was so popular, they reinforce that. So the whole thing with Ryan Reynolds, as we alluded to, is that for dumb guys, like dumb millennial guys in the 2000s, he was kind of an aspirational figure, right? That's how he's posed in all of these movies. So in Van Wilder, he's like the super duper senior who fucks a lot and drinks a lot, and he never has to grow up. In Waiting, he's the super duper senior who fucks all the teenagers at the restaurant he works at and never has to grow up and always has like a witty, edgy reply for everything. And in Just Friends, he's the unappreciated friend-zoned guy who then grows up to be really handsome and smart, and boy, she's gonna like me now. Isn't necessarily the most evil thing in the world, no, but it's so hack, right? It all hinges on this wish fulfillment thing for the guys that watch it. To be like, that's like me. I'm like Ryan Reynolds, and I'm gonna be really handsome and witty, and then all the girls are gonna reject not liking me then. I'm kind of painting with a broad brush, because to be fair, Just Friends, like I said, it tries to have its cake and eat it too. It does try to be like, well, she always liked him, but, you know, he just never realized it, or like they never got to that point. And Ryan Reynolds isn't saying like, well, I'm mad because I was friend-zoned. The bad guy is. But it's still kind of implicitly, it carries all those themes, right? It's like a Descendants song, right? It's like you don't have to interpret it in the most negative way. It kind of leaves you options to say, well, maybe it's saying this. But everyone watching this movie that likes this movie is going, yeah, this is like a guy that got friend-zoned.
No, and honestly, I know this is gonna sound very funny to say. It's basically like nerdy, like unrequited love, incel, however you want to describe it, however like extreme you want to see it as like dog whistling in that way. Like that's essentially what it is. Like the people who don't understand that are gonna see this like, oh, it's not that bad. But like the people that see it, they're like, this speaks to me. I know what this means, and blah blah blah. And you know, here's the thing, right? When I made the joke earlier about I was a fat kid, I could make those jokes. Like in a lot of ways, even though I would say this is definitely not the best of the Van Wilder movies we're talking about, this is the one that I identified with the most because I was the fat kid growing up, and I don't really have any like trauma related to that, I don't think. But like at the same time, like I understand where he's coming from, where you had these feelings for a girl who you thought didn't like you because you were unattractive or overweight. But in my opinion, and to be fair, obviously we only see him for like the first few minutes of this movie as like the fat guy who gets made fun of and blah blah blah. So we don't know all of what he did or didn't do, and you know, he's portrayed in the movie as more likable than that, right? But like the reason that I didn't have girls liking me growing up was not only just because I was unattractive and fat, but because I was annoying. I was annoying and lame.
That's the case with most of these young men who get into this situation. And that's normal. It's normal weighing when you're young and to not know how to talk to girls when you're young. We literally just did a whole episode about this, right?
And to be fair, we're going to do more episodes on the more extreme elements of that too at some point too.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to dig into there, especially like for millennials, I think. The thing with this movie is, first of all, you're right, Taylor. This is the easiest character to identify with if you're a young man. Because he's made, at least when he's young, to be awkward and be goofy, just want a girlfriend. It's a little harder to, in earnest, to identify with the waiter from Shenanigans at Waiting, or identify with Van Wilder. People still want to. He's still their wish fulfillment character. This is a pretty easy character, at least the young version, to slot yourself into. And honestly, probably the least harmful of these three movies, the least toxic of these three movies, because it is intended to be kind of a sappy love story movie. But even even that comes preloaded with all this weirdness about relationships and sex and gender. And it portrays, like, the female lead in Just Friends is still portrayed as being, like, very weirdly naive. There's something very, like, oblivious about her that I find really distasteful.
No, exactly. It's not quite like Born Sexy Yesterday, but it's not that much better than this.
Yeah, no, because it's the idea that she's just like, I'm so pure of heart, it never even occurred to me that anyone would see me that way. I don't want to read too much in. There's kind of a weird, like, Madonna horror thing kind of comes pre-baked into it to me. I don't have as many issues with this in terms of its themes as I do with, say, Waiting, which I think is just a gross movie, has really nasty views about gender relationships and sex, and then just kind of tries to, at the very end, be like, see, he doesn't want to take advantage of this girl. Whereas this, I think, this is the least popular in my experience of the three movies, but it's the one that I think you'll see the most echoes of today. Like, you talk about all the incel discourse, which already that's becoming a little dated, all of the PUA discourse. This ties right into all that shit that was going on in the mid-2000s, like, very directly.
Well, you know what's interesting, real quick, about the sort of nice guy to incel thing, right? Is that, like, the nice guy discourse is so fucking dead. It's not even a dead horse. It's like a ash horse. And what's interesting about that too, right, is that, like, in the 2000s, even though it was like a very pessimistic and negative decade, the thing that's interesting about it is that a lot of these guys were like, well, you know, I might not be romantically whatever, blah, blah, but, like, I am nice. I have this positive attribute or whatever. And obviously a lot of that was not true. A lot of these guys were just putting things on. They were really overinflating their, you know, kindness, and they were using it as a way to, like, manipulate or whatever. But they thought of themselves as having a positive attribute that women might find interesting, and why aren't they seeing that? And nowadays, those type of guys are like, oh no, it's the women's fault. They're all pieces of shit. They're all bitches. They're all whores. I'm fucking great, or I suck.
I'm not nice because they don't like nice guys because they're all lying bitches. So I'm not nice, but also they still don't like me, and that makes me madder.
Yeah, isn't that interesting how it went from that to that?
It is, and it's also like, it's these guys who talk about, at least in the more extreme circles, they talk about themselves in the most negative way, where they're like, I'm a fucking cucked beta submale with no jawline, and I'm fucking fat and useless, and I have a tiny dick, but also, like, why the fuck don't women like me? It's so fucking unfair. No woman would ever like me because they're all shallow, and also I'm a fucking monster person.
And what's amazing is if you were to talk to the quote-unquote nice guys back then, they'd probably look at that and be like, oh, that's fucking weird. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, they
would see
which
that.
is that's the correct response. And let's be fair here. A portion of those nice guys, not the majority of them, probably were nice and probably ended up just dating someone that liked them. Just doesn't always happen right away, right? You gotta take your lumps in dating like with everything else.
I was a fucking nice guy, you know what I mean? Like, I was the one who was like, I'm gonna be nice to girls and eventually they're gonna fuck me. And to be fair, in high school, I didn't even really try that hard to have sex anyways. It just wasn't very interesting to me. But, like, at the same time, I was still like, I'm gonna be nice to girls and see where that takes me. And for the most part, it got me literally nowhere. I was never bitter about it.
But the thing is, and eventually, like, you were a nice guy, and that didn't work as a means to, like, date or to have sex. Eventually, though, you do have sex. And what you learn, if you're a normal person, is that it's not because you're a nice guy or because you're an alpha male or because you like, we talked about this the whole episode. I want to do it. It's not because you cracked some code. It's because someone out there likes you for their own reasons, and you just have to find someone that feels that way. It's not because there's some magic trick you can do as a man to rewire fucking women's baby brains or their chimp brains to suddenly see you differently.
Exactly, 100%. And that's why this movie, even though it's the quote-unquote nice guy movie, and it is definitely the least toxic of the movies, the trilogy that we've talked about so far, but it is still toxic. There are some very pernicious, toxic, problematic elements, for lack of a better word, on all those, for sure.
Well, when I say it's the least toxic, what I mean is I rewatched Waiting, which, first of all, is just kind of nasty and mean-spirited, as I said, but has a pretty weird casual attitude towards sex with minors. I hate to be the one talking about age gaps and power dynamics, but there's a lot of questionable stuff in Waiting with that, with, like, sexualization of minors. With Van Wilder, I didn't rewatch the whole movie in preparation for this episode, but again, it's just a very degrading and very kind of, like, frat bro kind of view of sexuality. There's a sort of way in comedies from the 2000s in general where sex is portrayed in this way where it's completely a function of, like, it's a thing men do to women, which I think is how a lot of men, like straight men, learn about sex. It's like kind of like women are a thing I use to masturbate with, right? And I think you see that really heavily in both Van Wilder and Waiting, in the way that women are just filmed, the way they're displayed in the films, but also in the way that the characters, particularly Ryan Reynolds' characters, talk about women, you know?
No, absolutely. It's one of those things where it's just like we talked about with 2000s. Like there's just that underlying, and to be fair, obviously conscious element of just misogyny. And all these movies have different forms of misogyny, which is interesting.
And I want to go back to what I said in the beginning. I don't blame Ryan Reynolds for this. This was the culture of the 2000s. If it wasn't him, it would have been some other actor. What's interesting to me is that Ryan Reynolds kind of occupies the space as handsome, edgy, witty guy that you could project yourself onto and be like, man, if I was more outspoken, if I was more confident, this is the guy I'd be. And how perfectly he was able to transition from being edgy, cool, handsome guy that every like adolescent boy wants to project themselves onto into being Deadpool, which is like a more self-aware, more extreme version of that, right? Now I'm an edgy, cool guy who's literally superhuman.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is very interesting. Yeah, talk about, and to be fair, there's obviously other elder millennial actors who had their heyday in the 2000s and pivoted towards doing other things. I mean, I know I joked about the whole business acumen and his very unscrupulous business dealings at the beginning of the episode with like the Mint Mobile thing. But like, how many people when they were watching fucking Van Wilder in 2003 or whatever the fuck, or on Comedy Central in 2006 or whatever the fuck, were watching this and being like, oh yeah, this guy is going to be worth like $500 million one day. He is going to be the face of like the most like lame epic millennial shit, but be worth like more than most working actors combined. It's crazy to think about.
Yeah, I think my recollection of Ryan Reynolds at the time was that he was, for my peers who I felt were kind of basic, he was kind of like their cool guy. He's someone that both, I think, kind of hot couch white trash guys and kind of jock and preppy kids, they could all kind of project themselves onto in some vague way. But I don't think anyone thought he was going to be like a mover and shaker in Hollywood. I don't think that anyone at the time thought of him as like when we're watching Van Wilder, like he said, like he's going to be a guy pulling the strings on the business end of Hollywood. What I do think is that a lot of us, not me, but a lot of my peers again, saw him as kind of a Dane Cook type, like some edgy epic comedian. And the truth is he wasn't even that, right? He's just a pretty boy actor, right? Who they poured into the roles. I don't think he had a steady background in comedy or writing, even less of a background in comedy or writing than Dane Cook did, if that gives you any idea.
Oh no, absolutely, because Dane Cook, like, say what you want about Dane Cook, but that guy has been doing comedy at this point for like 30 fucking years. He put in the fucking work. And also, you know, talk about obviously problematic age gaps, for lack of a better word, sexual relationships. Dane Cook really knows about that. He really knows about that nowadays.
Yeah. Again, I never liked Dane Cook, and I liked some edgy, shitty stand-up comedy. I'm not saying I was like above that, but I never liked Dane Cook. But boy, some of his later stand-up specials got dark. Just like the way that Dane Cook often talks about women in a borderline violent way, and also talking about women as like something to masturbate with. I know that's a really gross phrase and I keep using it, but it's the best way I can describe this sort of right about women. That was really prevalent in the 2000s.
I mean, the fact that he is a middle-aged man who got married to a 19-year-old should tell you everything you need to know about that. That was not just a put-on. There was maybe some real-life ideology seeping in there, maybe a little bit.
I don't typically get into the age gap discourse. I think it can become weird and lack nuance in a lot of places. You should watch some Dane Cook's stand-up comedy, and we'll look at the movies he's been in, not least of which is Waiting, and just kind of the 2000s culture that he came out of and skyrocketed to the top of. Weird time to talk about, like sex and just portrayals of women, only tangentially related. But Taylor, have we ever talked about the teen celebrity countdown websites?
Yes, honestly, that is a thing that I would like to cover as like a cringe generational segment at some point to get real in depth with it. But yeah, that was fucking rough, dude. And I remember even when I was like a kid, because, you know, I would say that kind of reached its zenith around at the time I was like very early high school maybe. And I just remember I'm like, why is that like a thing that I care about?
And it was so normal. I know we overuse the phrase normalized, but it was so normal for like guys that were like 30 to be like, check the Hillary Duff, you know, countdown website, you know, or whatever the fuck.
No, it's fucking weird. And especially, and obviously, you know, we've talked a lot about sexuality in this episode already, but real quick, like, even when I was a kid, I never was just like, oh yeah, I can't wait, blah, blah. And it's like, I like older girls and, I mean, you know, whatever. It was never an age thing. It was just, who do I find hot, basically? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, well, if I was 16, I found a 17-year-old hot. If I was 17, I found a 16-year-old hot. It was never like, oh, I can't wait till this blah, blah, blah happens. Like, I was never like that. Well, it's and so that fucking weird to be like that.
Well, and it is because, again, not to paint too broad but like for the vast majority of those guys, it's because they're there's a power element to it. It's not just that they
of
happen
course.
to like younger girls. It's that this is like someone who they actually are not perceiving as an adult yet, like, which they should be, but they're not. And that's part of what they like, right?
No, absolutely. Also, real quick, Brian, total digression on the Dane Cook thing. Did you know that Dane Cook was the second person to sell out Madison Square Garden after Andrew
I
Dice
know
Clay?
it's crazy. And okay, I've heard people say, "Oh, they're the two biggest hack comedians." I gotta push back on that because I think Dice, who is also deeply offensive and a real piece of shit, was a very skilled comedian.
Yep, very skilled,
Was-
visionary auteur.
I'm being totally serious.
Real quick though,
Yeah.
Dane Cook was like a masterclass like marketer, 100%.
He was
An amazing marketer.
That's what I mean. He was one of the first guys to do online marketing. He was a MySpace guy. He had MySpace friends, but also he had this weird thing where he had a frat boy, everyman kind of populist energy, but he had this weird kind of like almost alt comedy, like surreality. Like looking back, it was all like epic, lol, random bullshit. But I think at the time it was sort of like it didn't feel weird to slot him next to someone like maybe even like David Cross or Patton Oswalt, because he had this weird, like he'd do a lot of like non sequiturs and he would talk really fast and he'd use big words, but also he had kind of, yeah, again, like a frat boy energy. So it's kind of like he was able to take the like the alt comedy vibe and make it accessible to like people who would never have liked the David Cross stand-up special, you know?
No, absolutely. And, you know, on top of that, too, I can't say I ever, like, loved Dane Cook. I mean, obviously, I knew people who liked Dane Cook. He was basically, like, the fucking Halo, Avenged Sevenfold, Mountain Dew comedian. And to be fair, like, Dane Cook's comedy is something that, like, I think has a place in comedy. It's one of those things where he was always a really good storyteller in his stand-up specials.
Yeah.
I did watch all of his stand-up specials back in the day because I just liked stand-up comedy back in the day.
So Dane Cook is obviously the most successful guy at that style. He was never my favorite. Like you, Taylor, I just liked watching stand-up comedy. I liked seeing different people's styles, different approaches, and I liked the alt comedy thing. You know, I loved Patton Oswalt and David Cross and Michael Ian Black, and I loved like old school comedy. Like I liked Andrew Dice Clay and Eddie Murphy and all those guys. Dane Cook was never my favorite. That was part of a style of comedian, like the guys that talk fast and tell these long stories. And the guy that I liked a lot of the time, who I now realize was basically ripping off Dane Cook, I think, was Daniel Tosh.
He had that frat boy energy about him, too, though.
He did. He was a little bit more like ironic detachment, but he had a frat boy vibe as well.
He was like Michael Ian Black and Dane Cook combined.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to put it. And at the time, I liked Tosh. When I think back to his stand-up now, I'm like, oh, he kind of bit off Dane Cook's style.
It's interesting, and you know, that's the thing though, is that like obviously Dane Cook for a while was the biggest comedian in the world, but like not that many comedians like ripped off his style, which is interesting. Like obviously Daniel Tosh did, but there weren't that many comedians who ripped off the whole like I'm going to like do long involved stories and do like frat boy humor necessarily.
Here's my understanding of that as someone who has no experience in stand-up comedy. I don't think stand-up comedians ever liked Dane Cook in the same way that a lot of them didn't like Mencia, right? I think that even early on, it seems like there was a feeling by stand-up comedians that what Cook was doing was kind of to them demeaning to the art form.
Yes, and also to be fair though, Dane Cook did have a fairly prominent series of accusations about joke theft, particularly of Louis C.K.'s material. So there was also that reason why people didn't like him, which to be fair, I'm not going to get into that whole can of worms. I think people can just come up with thoughts just completely independent, although the Louis C.K. one was a little too similar because like there were several bits of Louis C.K. that were exactly the same thing Dane Cook did later on. So I'm like, Louis C.K. did have the style where he would tell stories to a certain extent. So, you know, I don't think there's enough evidence. Like the Carlos Mencia thing, that is proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Like, 100%.
But I'm with you on this, Taylor. I didn't want to bring up the Cook joke theft thing because I don't know enough about it. Like you said, it's possible for two people to come up with the same thoughts independently, especially when you work in the same industry and maybe you're like living in the same time. You know, like that seems reasonable to me.
No, absolutely. But you know what? Real quick though, we've been on a Dane Cook tangent for a while. Did you want to have any final thoughts about Ryan Reynolds, or do you want to continue this on, Brian?
So what I would say about Ryan Reynolds, and particularly about these Ryan Reynolds films from the 2000s, are if you're listening and you've never seen any of them, I don't recommend any of them. They're not good. Go watch some clips from maybe each movie on YouTube for context. What's interesting to me about this in the context of our show is, like I said, this guy was a dumb frat boy. Like he was like a pretty boy who was like popular with, I think, like young girls because he was just conventionally good looking and like muscular. And then he was edgy and kind of a shitbag, and so he was popular with young guys for that. But like you said, Taylor, who could have imagine that that he would pivot to doing all this business mogul shit and being more on the like string pulling side of the industry, but also that he could take this same lowest common denominator, frat boy persona, and transport it into the MCU, like the single biggest like franchise ever at this point, I would say. And he's become now like a family icon, you know? Ryan Reynolds, the edgy epic superhero. It is kind of an indictment of like mainstream pop culture in America, huh? Like that, first of all, these movies come out of the 2000s and they're immediately dated. Like they immediately, like we said, you look back at them, they're heinous, they're awful, they're unfunny, but also that this guy is able to build this brand out of it, this massive, like empirical brand. And he's just the blandest, most bullshit guy to ever live.
No, absolutely. I couldn't fucking agree more. And also, another final thought I have, the worst version of the Canadian Ryans, because I think you and I can both agree Ryan Gosling is way better. I like Ryan Gosling a lot more.
I don't even like him that much, but I love him way more than Ryan Reynolds, easily.
Oh yeah, much better fucking actor. And also much hotter and way less annoying wife on top of it. Oh, did we even get into Ryan Reynolds' wife, Brian?
No.
Ryan Reynolds' wife is Blake Lively.
I don't even know who that is, to be honest.
I mean, she's really annoying. She's had a bunch of controversies. Well, the most recent controversy was the "It Ends With Us" thing, the Jason Baldoni thing. Do you remember that?
No, this is all new to me. I don't
my God. I thought this was also part of the reason you wanted to cover Ryan Reynolds. No, Blake Lively was in this really shitty, like, romantic movie about a year or two ago that was directed by this guy named Justin Baldoni. That was an adaptation of a Colleen Hoover book, I think, she's a whole fucking can of worms, too. But there was this whole thing where there's this lawsuit that keeps going back and forth about, like, sexual harassment and not being respected. And there were, like, some weird, because Justin Baldoni was the director / actor, and there was, like, not a intimacy coordinator, and there was word back and forth on whether or not that was Blake Lively or Justin Baldoni's decision. And it's just a total fucking legal mess. And last time I checked, like, one person had the judgment against them that was like $500 million, and the other person had the judgment against them that was a slightly, like, reduced or increased sub. I'm surprised you're not familiar with the "It Ends With Us" controversy, because that was a huge story. I'm surprised you're not familiar with that. But that is a real quick and abridged part 2 to why Ryan Reynolds is even more cringe, because his wife is also cringe and very annoying.
Looking at pictures of her now, she looks like the perfect match for him. Just annoying and fucking bland. No,
she is awful. But Ryan Gosling's wife, Eva Mendes, complete just S-tier 2000s baddie. Holy shit. I loved her in everything. Do you remember Ghost Rider? That's it. Do you remember Ghost Rider?
Yeah.
The Nick Cage movie?
I do remember Ghost Rider, yes.
She was the love interest in that movie. And I remember when I reviewed it with the old Cage Fight fam, and I remember saying, like, Nick Cage, like, gave up everything to be eternal and never get to fuck Eva Mendes. And I'm like, that is such a horrible thing. Like, I would never take that. And they're like,
that's, well, like, Taylor, like a Greek curse.
It's like, well, Taylor, you're not going to fuck Eva Mendes anyways. But I'm like, yeah, but I have a chance. He can never do it.
Yeah, you have a chance now. He doesn't even have that now.
It could be 1 in a billion, but at least I got a 1 in a billion chance.
Yeah, that's like the classic Dumb and Dumber bit.
Oh, God. But yes, that is one thing. I will send you the articles on the "This Ends With Us" thing, because that's an insane story. Like, this lawsuit's been going on for years, and it's like every year it gets hot potatoed on whose fault it is. It's wild.
Yeah, I need more Ryan Reynolds drama in my life. I'm reading about this Hoover lady's books, and she sounds like a hack, to be honest.
Oh, you don't know about Colleen Hoover?
No, this is not something that I would ever learn about or like.
I'm surprised, Brian, because we just talked about, like, misogyny and how, like, women in media is portrayed so horribly.
So, well, that's interesting, and I do want to learn about this now that you're telling me this. But yeah, by the 2010s, this was so not the type of media that I would ever be exposed to or, like, engage with. You know what I mean?
No, and to be fair, I'm not an avid reader anyways, but, you know, I didn't, like, read any of the books or whatever, but I've just learned, like, secondhand from, like, women, and Colleen Hoover is a very controversial writer. She's loved by, like, the Taylor Swift, like, audience, or, like, Swiftie audience, but she's basically hated by, like, non-boring, basic white women, I guess is the best way to describe it.
She seems like a demon.
I went on the "It Ends With Us" controversy on Wikipedia, and this Wikipedia is longer than some countries' entries on Wikipedia. Like, it's crazy how long this is.
People love talking about stupid, weird shit like that.
No, it is. It honestly is like the 2024 to 2025 version of, like, the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial. It is that messy.
People loved that. People were so, we'll talk about that some other time, but boy, people loved that 6 months or whatever. People were so excited to talk about it.
No, and to be fair, it obviously didn't have as much media coverage because clearly you're not as familiar with this story as I am. But like, it was almost to that level where like every day it was a new update on why either of these people suck.
And that's another thing with being an old millennial is we're all our synapses have all been destroyed by the internet and we're all just hankering for the red meat.
No, absolutely. But you know what? Speaking of hankering for cool, red meat, American-blooded things by, I believe, Canadians, that ends our episode on Ryan Reynolds. So let's get to our pluggables. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. And as well, please subscribe and follow us on both of our YouTube and our Spotify channels where we are uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well as always, please donate to the Lucifer and the Father campaign. Of course, our good friends Scott, Shaw, and Robert are creating a fantastic series. They might be on a future episode of ours. We're still working out the kinks on those details, but we're hoping to have them on very soon to plug the most recent episodes of Lucifer and the Father and to update the progress on us, or for us. And Brian, do you have any updates real quick before we get into the future details of that possibly?
Right now, I know that they're getting ready for the Thanksgiving Christmas season, so I have talked to Scott a little bit since our last kind of planning thing, just to catch up on where we're at. The rumor has it they are getting ready to reveal some stuff about upcoming Lucifer and the Father episodes, and that there's not only in the works, but some completed things. So it is possible that Scott, Sean, and Robert will be dropping by. We think we have an idea of when that'll happen. We just got to figure out a day that'll work for everyone. We want to make sure it lines up and that it makes sense. Yeah, they have a lot to show off. We've been talking it up for a long time. I know some people probably were like, well, when's it going to get here? But Lucifer and the Father is here. It's happening. We're really glad that we stuck by Scott and John and Robert through all this. They put in a lot of hard work. It looks like the rubber's hit the road. And I think after the holiday season, or at least after the Thanksgiving season, seems like they'll be rolling into post. We'd like to get them in here to just fill us in on what's going on.
No, absolutely. We're very excited. And, as always, we talk about, you donate to the campaign, just send us a YouTube comment, send us an email. We will, within reason, about $20-25 match those donations, because even though, of course, they are moving and chugging along on their dreams, we still want to make their dreams even more of a reality than they already are. And, of course, speaking of making dreams into realities, of course, we're always talking about Luigi Mangione and his defense fund. At this point, the trial is hopefully coming fairly soon, at least one of the trials, because unfortunately, I believe he's facing at least 3 different trials from 3 different entities.
Yeah.
But either way, we want him to have the best possible trial. Of course, if this trial were to be held today, he'd be found not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. There's no convincing evidence that he did these things. Once again, that is the killing of Brian Thompson. He is the, at this point, alleged suspect, but of course, he didn't fucking do it. There's no compelling evidence against him. There's really no physical evidence, and the physical evidence that they quote-unquote do or don't have is probably not admissible because it didn't Mirandize him for the first 17 minutes of his arrest. So we'll see what kind of argument the prosecution bring forward, but I'm gonna guess it's gonna be a pretty fucking weak argument versus what federal juries are usually used to.
It's gonna be a bunch of bullshit. They have nothing. And we say it all the time. If they had any really compelling evidence that Luigi did this, we would all know about it, right? Because they want us all to know. That's the whole thing. I can't stress enough. They are mad that they weren't able to pin this high-profile crime on whoever they wanted without people getting pissed off about it. And they want to make an example out of him. It seems like he's, like Taylor said, Luigi's in a pretty good spot right now. I don't think the prosecution has a very strong case. And, of course, with the help of everyone that's donated, that I know Taylor and I both have, we both personally believe in this. We believe in Luigi's innocence and his right to a free trial. It seems like he's in a pretty good position, as good a position as, could be expected, all things considered. But wouldn't be a bad thing if you wanted to donate more to do it. Or even just to keep talking about Luigi, make sure, because it's been a while now. It's been almost a year now. We don't want people to forget about it. People to forget about how he's been railroaded, and especially how sussy his fucking arrest was. Because that whole fucking thing, if you're a normal person and that doesn't smell fishy to you, like, there's something going on. Because the events of that arrest, they don't add up. And the fact that he could be tried so severely with such scant evidence, or such a lack of evidence, I mean, it should make all of us mad. Fortunately, he has made a lot of us mad, but we don't want people to forget about this. If you feel like you're like, well, obviously he did it, even if you think he did it, they don't have the evidence to prove that. And you shouldn't be okay with just them going on their gut feeling and having him imprisoned for life or potentially executed. Like, all of us, just as citizens, could be outraged by this. Because based on how they arrested him, any of us could be plucked out of a McDonald's or a fucking Starbucks and arrested under similar circumstance.
No, absolutely. And yeah, talk about the compelling evidence that, or quote unquote compelling evidence that they have that they've never released. Like, they still haven't released the fucking quote unquote manifesto that he had. They didn't detail if like the bullets match the bullets that were found in fucking Brian Thompson's body or not. There's really no surveillance evidence outside of the random stills that they had, that half of them don't even look like fucking Luigi in the first place. They all look like completely different fucking people. There is literally no compelling evidence, like straight up. There's just nothing. They would talk about it if they did, but it's always like, oh, he did it. He 100% fucking, because we could.
We all know he did it. Obviously he did it. Cut the bullshit.
You know, it's just like all those really smart Facebook guys talk about. If you just have a hunch, it's probably true.
You wouldn't have a hunch for no reason.
Fucking wild. But, you know, speaking of having intuition for things that actually make sense, have an intuition to donate and subscribe to our Patreon today. You know, of course, we've had a Patreon for a while. I don't think we have any patrons at the moment, but like I said, be our first one.
Come on, help us out. Taylor and I, we have kids. We need to get Christmas presents. We need to get a Christmas turkey, a Christmas goose. Help us out here. My children are starving right now, and you could save them.
Yes, absolutely. You know, I have one starving child and one child who doesn't eat but wants to eat. You know, they're both 11 years old, and I see them once every few months. They're dogs, to be very clear. But they need my help. They need our financial help. They live in homes where they both have very small bedrooms. You know, they need larger bedrooms. So we need to get more money so we can pay for their bedrooms to make them.
And if you're a listener, and you're choosing not to do anything to help those dogs, guess what? It's on you.
Absolutely. Our dog phobic, our canine phobic audience. Oh God. But yes, we've been mostly plugging the $5 tier recently. So of course that is the one where if you donate to or become a patron of the $5 tier, you get every episode 48 hours early. That's 2 to 4 episodes a month, because we always say the first 48 hours are the most important. You know, for example, when the tide against Ryan Reynolds happened, it's already happened against Blake Lively, his wife, but not quite Ryan Reynolds yet. But whenever that tide happens, you want to be the first one on that fucking wave. And honestly, we might be the first people on that wave, because that'd be really hilarious if we release this episode and that's the week where everyone's like, oh, Ryan Reynolds sucks now, and he gets canceled.
We pop the fuck off. Yeah. See, okay, if you had donated to the Patreon, you would have gotten this early, and you could be on the ground floor, and then when all your coworkers go, this Ryan Reynolds guy that everyone loves, he's kind of a creep, and then you could just steal our takes and say, I've been saying he was a creep since Waiting. You ever seen that movie? He tries to fuck a child in it.
We will cross that bridge when it comes, but you know what, speaking of being mean to people and DMing people, do we have any updates on our social medias, Brian, or do you have anything to plug?
No, we don't have any updates now. Please follow us at Millennials Are Old Pod, all one word, on Instagram and Threads. That remains the best way to reach out to me regarding the podcast. If you want to harass me, if you want to bully me, if you are Ryan Reynolds and you want to tell me your side of the story and convince me you're actually a really nice guy and that actually Van Wilder is a Verhoeven-esque satire of the ruling class's children, reach out to me at Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram. You can also follow the Facebook page, Millennials Are Old. I gotta tell you, that Billy Jack community, it was kind of popping off about a year or 2 years ago. Like, it was actually seemed like there was a lot of regular contribution in there, but I don't know if they're all hibernating or all the Billy Jack fans are starting to die. I might have to go in there and stir the pot. I was thinking about Tom Laughlin recently, for the first time in a while, so maybe it's time to dust off that old chestnut. But yeah, follow us at Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram and Threads, and the Facebook page Millennials Are Old. You can also follow me on Instagram and Threads at JLo Biafra. That's all one word, JLOBIAFRA. It's a pun. It's a very millennial pun.
No, abso-fucking-lutely. But speaking of waiting, Brian, I'm waiting to go to sleep because it's Monday night and it's late and I'm fucking tired. And I think it's wild that we're staying up this late because we're old as shit. You know what I mean?
You know what? I am just friends with my pillow and my mattress, which I cannot wait to reunite with and go to sleep.
I'm gonna lay dead in my bed and dream of swimming in a pool. Okay, I'm done.
Dead pool. Yeah.
I'm done with the bad fucking references.
Have
a good night, everybody.
I was worried at the start of this episode that Reynolds was too nice for us to do this episode on. I was like, what if secretly he's a really nice guy who just made some dumb movies? I've become more confident that he's a real piece of shit. So have a good night, everyone.
Absolutely. And maybe one day we'll do it ends with us controversy episode, but who the fuck knows? That's very millennial. Taylor Swift is involved in the lawsuit, to be very clear also.
Holy shit.
All right, have a good night, everybody. Sleep tight, and we're going to come back with a great episode for you next time as always.